The Thing About Traditions by Jerry F. The 12 Traditions, a Non-Traditional Approach. Much has been written about the secular AA beliefs and attitudes towards the 12 steps. Some groups have chosen to rewrite them to eliminate God references. The risk there, of course, is incurring the wrath of the local intergroup and perhaps that of our fellow AAs. Some groups simply don't mention the 12 steps in their format in other readings. My home group is in the latter category, with the implicit understanding that we approve of and adopt some steps, and at least some parts of other steps. But what about the 12 traditions? Is there anything there that might give us pause? Spoiler alert, there sure as hell is. Most of us first encountered the traditions, those steps written for the groups, on window shades in our meeting rooms. However, they are best read in the back half of our 12 and 12 book, a framework for governance for a fellowship that insists upon remaining unorganized, derived from Tradition 9, is brilliant in its conception and admirable in its execution. Written by Bill when, we are told, that he was in the worst stage of his latest bout with clinical depression. They contain some of his best writing. For that alone, they are a pleasure to read. Then, too, who can doubt that AA would even exist without the traditions to keep us from tearing ourselves apart when weathering some of our worst internecine battles? The history of AA, properly understood, is the history of how the 12 traditions saved us from ourselves. So does that mean that we, as secular members of AA, ought to accept the 12 traditions exactly as written? Well, there we need to consider all of the traditions. In doing so, we see that we may affirm some of them, but not all. As secular AA members, we rely upon Tradition 3 and Tradition 4 rather more than do some of our more religious members. For us, these two traditions validate our claim to be full-fledged AA members. Tradition 3. The only requirement for AA membership is a desire to stop drinking. Tradition 4. Each group should be autonomous except in matters affecting other groups or AA as a whole. However, as a secular member of AA, I find that I cannot give an unqualified endorsement to the 12 traditions as written. When asked about it, I have stipulated that I would do so only with the exception of Tradition 2 and Tradition 12. To be precise, my difficulty is with the first part of the second tradition and the long form of the 12th tradition. Tradition 2, short form. For our group purpose, there is but one ultimate authority, a loving God as he may express himself in our group conscience. Our leaders are but trusted servants, they do not govern. This is the tradition that has the long form shorter than the short form. The long form contains only the first sentence. In the essay in the 12 and 12 on this tradition, Bill spends a few pages telling us how groups are formed and led if they don't have leaders telling the group members how they should act. It isn't his best writing, but it isn't bad. The closing sentence is, quote, "I listened and, thank God, I obeyed," end quote. I do not accept the first sentence of this tradition. I do not have, nor do I believe AA has, quote, "a loving God," end quote. Surely we can reach a consensus at the group level without invoking an interventionist supernatural deity who will tell us mere mortals what to do when we are in doubt. Our group conscience is a powerful thing that derives its authority precisely from those same group members. Indeed, as explicated in the AA Service Manual combined with 12 Concepts for World Service, also written by Bill, our first concept is, quote, "The final responsibility and the ultimate authority for AA World Service should always reside in the collective conscience of our whole fellowship." End quote. Yes, our collective conscience, not a God, however loving or spiteful he may be on any day. And while it's true that the 12 concepts are written for and directly affect only the General Service Board, they have long been an influential guide for AA groups at the local and regional level. And yet, we can't expunge the entire second tradition. The second sentence of the second tradition is important, vital even, to the continued existence of our fellowship. Quote, "Our leaders are but trusted servants. They do not govern." End quote. It is so important that it is repeated, and is the only clause of which this is true, a few times in the bylaws of Wafdiak, as it was then constituted. It is more than a reminder. It approaches the status of a mantra. We need always ensure that, at the international, national, regional, and local level, including our home groups, our duly elected leaders are not leading or governing, but rather serving our needs. And yet, Concept X applies. Concept X. Every service responsibility should be matched by an equal service authority, with the scope of such authority well defined. We must grant the authority necessary for our elected leaders to perform their well-defined duties. Heresy. Yes, but what about a rewrite? A secular tradition too. For our group purpose, there is but one ultimate authority, a collaborative discussion resulting in essential group consensus through our group conscience. Our leaders are but trusted servants. They do not govern. It reflects, in my experience, the actual decision-making process in our home groups, service structure, and intergroups. Anonymity and spirituality. The 12th tradition is anonymity is the spiritual foundation of all our traditions, ever reminding us to place principles before personalities. Yeah, well, there are among us, we secular alcoholics in AA, members who call themselves rationalists. They do not believe in anything spiritual or otherworldly. They hold that science and reason can explain everything that we encounter in life, and there is no need for any metaphysical interpretations. To insist on a spiritual dimension to the 12th tradition is to exclude these rationalist members from our secular fellowship. What if we struck spiritual from the tradition? Our spiritual members should have no difficulty with this. We are not negating their spiritual beliefs. We are simply not giving it a place in our tradition. After all, the intent of the 12th tradition is twofold. We acknowledge that anonymity is the foundational principle of all the 11 traditions that preceded this one, and we are reminded to always place principles before personalities. Good stuff, that. Anonymity, fully realized, is a complex proposition. It decidedly does not mean not giving your last name and other contact info to others in the fellowship. The 12th tradition, as explained in the 12 and 12 essay, is clear, although this is an instance in which I wish Bill had gone into further detail. The importance of humility in practicing this tradition is referred to in the essay as an, quote, all-pervading spiritual quality, end quote, which I find unhelpful, and yet I think there is so much that could be written on this aspect. Let's back up a step, or a tradition. Our 11th tradition is Tradition 11. Our public relations policy is based on attraction rather than promotion. We need always maintain personal anonymity at the level of press, radio, and films. By extension, then, to include TV, the Internet, and the next mass communication form to come along. Here we turn to Dr. Bob for clarification. In Dr. Bob and the Good Old Timers, page 264, He is quoted as saying there are two ways to break the anonymity tradition. Quote, by giving your name at the public level of press or radio, or by being so anonymous that you can't be reached by other drunks. End quote. And yet, in my experience, this tradition is widely violated in AA, especially the second clause. And, as secular members of AA, we are still too small in numbers to keep ourselves separate or remote from other members when we could be helping newcomers and old-timers to understand how a godless recovery works. And then there is the long form of Tradition 12. Tradition 12, long form. And finally, we of Alcoholics Anonymous believe that the principle of anonymity has an immense spiritual significance. It reminds us that we are to place principles before personalities, that we are actually to practice a genuine humility. This to the end that our great blessings may never spoil us, that we shall forever live in thankful contemplation of Him who presides over us all. Bill, Bill, Bill. Yes, the humility required to practice the principle of anonymity does have immense significance, but I see no reason to categorize it as spiritual, and I do not live in thankful contemplation of Him who presides over us all. The genuine humility needed to practice anonymity in AA is not that of some stale catechism, but rather the realization that I am not the message. I am carrying the message, and the message is that anyone can get and stay clean and sober if they are willing to practice the principles of the program. As a secular member, I do not believe that I can turn my will, my life, or anything else over to a supreme being. I must accept responsibility for my actions, and that includes my continued sobriety. Here's the point. I accept and am truly grateful for the traditions with the exception of the first part of the second tradition and the long form of the 12th tradition. Those I reject, and I do not understand how any of us, we secular AA members, can have allegiance or devotion to the 12 traditions as they are now written. It is high time that this position is reflected in our home group formats and in our regional and international organizations. Either we don't mention the 12 traditions in our purpose statements, as we have come to do with the steps, or we affirm belief in them while explicitly denying that acceptance to the first part of Tradition 2 and the long form of Tradition 12. Toronto has shown us the way. We can acknowledge or adopt the 12 traditions of AA. I choose to acknowledge their existence in their entirety and adopt 10.5 of them. About Jerry F. Jerry is one of the founding members of We Agnostics in Tempe, Arizona, and was the instigator of the WAFT Arizona Convention last November in Phoenix. He has served in many positions in his 27 years in AA and is currently treasurer of his traditional AA group, coffee maker of his secular group, and has recently completed a term as a board member of WAFTIAC. He considers his greatest achievement as being responsible for a change to the 4th edition of the Big Book, and his greatest asset as being relentlessly anal. Artwork. Images by Cope C. With appreciation to Henry Payne for his focused vision and talented hand, and apologies for adapting his Moses to a different purpose. To view the original print version of this article, The Thing About Traditions by Jerry F., dated March 26, 2017, which contains original artwork and hyperlinks to references throughout the article, please visit aapbc.org. beyondbelief.org. Simply search for The Thing About Traditions in the Steps and Traditions category. For more stories, articles, and podcasts, please visit our YouTube or SoundCloud channels. Just search for AA